My husband, James Scott, never saw me as a person. I was an asset, a beautiful piece of his portfolio, the perfect wife to complement his million-dollar life. That night, as I watched him spin his new, younger acquisition across the dance floor, my hand instinctively went to my stomach, to the secret I'd been waiting for the perfect moment to share. He danced as if I wasn't there, as if our entire life was nothing. He didn't know that for me. This wasn't an ending. It was a countdown, and by morning, both his wife and his carefully constructed world would be gone. The crystal chandeliers of the Fairmont Chicago's Imperial Ballroom dripped light onto the city's elite. It was the annual Starlight Foundation Gala, the glittering apex of the philanthropic season, and I, Sharon Russ, was playing my part to perfection. My emerald silk gown, a custom piece by a designer James had approved of, clung to a body that held the most profound secret of my life. At 3 months pregnant, I was still a whisper of a new reality, a secret known only to me. James had always been a breathtaking dancer. It was one of the first things that had captivated me when we met at a university fundraiser a decade ago. Tonight, his bespoke tuxedo fit his athletic frame like a second skin as he led Rochelle Cherry through an intricate, passionate tango. Her crimson dress was a slash of defiance against the ballroom's muted elegance, a color chosen to be seen, to claim. They moved as one, a seamless, fiery entity, their bodies communicating a story of clandestine meetings and shared desires. They make quite the pair, don't they? A voice purred beside me. Melissa Vance, wife of one of James's junior partners, held her martini like a weapon. Her eyes, however, weren't on the dancing couple, but on me, searching for a crack in my composure. James has always appreciated a partner who can keep up, I replied, my voice a marvel of calm. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, the bubbles fizzing on my tongue, a stark contrast to the acid churning in my gut. For 6 months, I had known. It started with the scent of a perfume that wasn't mine, clinging to his shirts, the late nights at the office that stretched into sunrises, the financial statements I, with my forgotten degree in architecture and a mind for detail, had started to scrutinize. Rochelle wasn't just a symptom of a failing marriage. She was a strategic acquisition. As a junior analyst at a rival firm, her access to information was almost as appealing to James as her youth. He saw me then, his eyes flickering in my direction for a split second across the crowded floor. There was no guilt in his gaze, only a brief, almost imperceptible annoyance, as if my presence were a minor inconvenience he had to manage. He spun Rochelle, her laughter echoing, and in that moment, I wasn't his wife. I was an audience member he had forgotten to dismiss. The weight of the platinum wedding band on my finger felt impossibly heavy, a shackle to a life that had slowly suffocated me. He had convinced me to put my own architectural firm on hold. Just for a few years, Sharon, he'd said, his voice smooth as honey. Until Scott Capital is stable. Then we'll build your dream. The years had passed. Scott Capital had become a titan in the private equity world, and my blueprints gathered dust in a forgotten corner of our Lincoln Park brownstone. My dream had become my little hobby. I moved through the throng of bodies, the murmur of conversations about stock options and summering in the Hamptons fading into a dull roar. I found myself at a small, unoccupied cocktail table near the edge of the dance floor. The orchestra transitioned to a slower, more intimate melody. James pulled Rochelle closer, his hand splayed possessively on the small of her back. Her head rested on his shoulder, their faces so close they were breathing the same air. This was the moment. The one I had rehearsed in my mind 1,000 times. The point of no return. I slipped the ring from my finger. The metal was cool against my skin, a stark contrast to the heat of my resolve. It was a beautiful ring, a flawless 5-carat diamond James had presented as a symbol of his unwavering commitment. It was, I now knew, just another investment, designed to appreciate in value and secure my compliance. I walked to the edge of the dance floor, directly in their line of sight as they turned. James's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing his perfectly composed features. Rochelle's triumphant smile faltered as she saw me approach. "Sharon," James said, his voice low and laced with warning. "What are you doing?" "I was just admiring the performance," I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the music. "It's quite a show." I stepped past them, to the table where they had left their champagne flutes. With a soft, deliberate click that seemed to silence the entire ballroom, I placed my wedding ring on the polished wood beside his glass. "Keep dancing, James," I said quietly, my gaze meeting his. For the first time in a long time, I felt no fear, only a vast, liberating emptiness. My hand drifted down, resting for a fleeting moment on the gentle curve of my belly. "You won't even notice I'm gone." I turned before he could form a response, before his mind could process the public defiance, the sheer audacity of my act. I walked, not ran, through the parting sea of onlookers, my spine straight, my head held high. Behind me, I could feel the ripple of chaos, the first tremor in the earthquake that was about to shatter James Scott's perfect world. He wouldn't catch me. By the time he untangled himself from his mistress and his pride, I would be a ghost, on my way to a future I had meticulously designed without him. A future for two. The sleek, anonymous black sedan idled at the East Service entrance of the Fairmont, just as promised. The man behind the wheel, Daniel Wilson, didn't look at me as I slid into the passenger seat. His focus was on the rear-view mirror, his expression a mask of calm concentration. Daniel and I had been friends since college, long before James had entered my life. He was a cybersecurity analyst, a man who saw the world in patterns and back doors, and the only person who knew the full truth of my gilded cage. "You did it," he said, his voice low as he pulled away from the curb, merging smoothly into the river of Chicago traffic. "Are you okay?" "I'm better than I've been in a decade," I whispered, the adrenaline of the last 10 minutes beginning to recede, leaving a hollow, vibrating space in its wake. I resisted the urge to look back. The glittering hotel, the life it represented. It didn't deserve a final glance. Daniel's friendship was one of the few things James had never managed to acquire or diminish. He'd tried, of course, referring to Daniel as my tech nerd friend, with a dismissive wave of his hand. But Daniel had seen through James from the beginning. "He doesn't look at you," Daniel had told me once, years ago, after a dinner party. "He looks past you, at what you reflect back on him." I had been offended then. Now the accuracy of his assessment was a chilling comfort. The car hummed along Lakeshore Drive, the city's skyline a breathtaking panorama of light and steel. It was the city where I'd dreamed of building, of leaving my mark with structures of glass and concrete. Now I was leaving it behind, a fugitive from my own life. "He's going to call," Daniel said, breaking the silence. "He's probably blowing up your phone right now." I reached into my clutch, pulled out the rose-gold iPhone James had given me for my birthday, and powered it off without a second thought. "Let him. By morning, this number won't exist." The memory surfaced. Unbidden? It was our 2nd anniversary. We were in our half-furnished Lincoln Park brownstone, surrounded by moving boxes. I had just landed my first major independent contract, a renovation project for a historic downtown library. I was ecstatic, spreading the blueprints across our new dining table, my voice alive with passion as I explained my vision for the space. James had listened for about 3 minutes, a polite, vacant smile on his face. Then he'd gently rolled up my blueprints. "That's wonderful, honey. A great little hobby to keep you busy," he'd said. "Now, about the fundraiser for the alderman next month. I need you to chair the planning committee. It's crucial for the Scott capital expansion." I remembered the air leaving my lungs, the way my excitement had withered under the weight of his casual dismissal. A hobby. All my years of education, my passion, my talent, reduced to a hobby. That was the first time I realized our partnership wasn't a collaboration, it was a corporation, with him as CEO and me as the beautifully decorated, unpaid head of hospitality. The compromises began there, small at first, then consuming. I put my firm on hold. I chaired his committees. I hosted his clients. I curated our life to be a flawless backdrop for his ambition. I had become the architect of my own prison. "We're heading north," Daniel said, pulling me from the memory. "The cabin in Wisconsin is ready. You'll be safe there for a few days while we initiate the next phase." "And the package?" I asked, my voice tight. "In the glove compartment, new ID, new phone, and the access keys to the accounts." I opened it. Inside was a driver's license for an Anna Cole. The woman in the photo was me, but not me. Her hair was a honey blonde, her expression neutral and unreadable. There was a debit card for a bank in Zurich and a sleek, encrypted smartphone. Anna Cole. It felt strange on my tongue, the name of a stranger who was about to become my salvation. "He'll assume you went to your parents' place in Naples," Daniel said, correctly predicting James's linear, arrogant thinking. "Or that you're hiding out at a spa. He won't think to look for you in a rustic cabin 3 states away. He thinks you're incapable of surviving without a 5-star hotel." He was right. James's perception of me was his greatest weakness and my greatest advantage. He saw a fragile, decorative wife. He was about to meet the woman he had buried beneath years of neglect and condescension. As we crossed the state line, the city lights giving way to the profound darkness of the countryside, I thought of the ultrasound photo hidden in my wallet. A tiny, flickering bean of life. James knew nothing about it. I had planned to tell him tonight, a desperate, final attempt to see if there was any humanity left in the man I had married. His dance with Rochelle had been the brutal answer. This wasn't just an escape anymore. It was a rescue mission. I was saving not just myself, but the child who deserved to be born into a world free of its father's suffocating shadow. The ghost of Sharon Russ was fading with every mile we drove, and in her place, Anna Cole was beginning to take shape, forged in betrayal and fueled by a mother's fierce, unyielding love. The cabin was nestled deep within Wisconsin's Northwoods, a rustic A-frame structure that smelled of pine and wood smoke. It was owned by a shell corporation Daniel had set up years ago, a digital fortress with a physical address. Inside, a fire was already crackling in the stone hearth. It was simple, warm, and more of a home than the meticulously curated brownstone I'd left behind. "Your go-bag is in the bedroom," Daniel said, placing a laptop on the heavy wooden coffee table. "Essentials are packed. The rest of your things, we'll have to consider them casualties of war." I thought of my architectural books, my drafting table, the half-finished clay models of buildings that would never be built. They weren't just things. They were pieces of a self I had allowed to be amputated. "It's fine," I said, my voice betraying a small tremor. "They belonged to a different person." Daniel opened the laptop. "Okay, phase 2. The offshore account is active. The first transfer cleared an hour ago. Exactly 50% of all legitimate, liquid joint assets. No more. No less. For months, with the secret help of a forensic accountant Daniel had vetted, I had been tracing the labyrinth of our finances. I meticulously separated the money we had earned and saved together from the shadowy investments and private accounts James had created without my knowledge. I was taking only what was legally mine. The rest, the evidence of his deception, was my insurance policy. "The dead man's switch is armed," Daniel continued, his fingers flying across the keyboard. It was his idea. A secure cloud server held copies of every incriminating document I had found. If I didn't log in with a specific code every 72 hours, the entire package would be automatically sent to the board of Scott Capital, the SEC, and the top financial journalist at the Chicago Tribune. It was a digital sword of Damocles hanging over James's head. I sank onto the worn leather sofa, the warmth of the fire a welcome comfort. The adrenaline had completely worn off, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. Now that the escape was real, the enormity of what I had done, and what had been done to me, crashed down. The affair with Rochelle was the most visible betrayal, but it wasn't the wound that had severed us. The true killing blow had come 3 months ago. James was supposedly at a partner's retreat in Aspen. I was searching his home office for some old tax documents when my hand brushed against a loose floorboard beneath his desk. My architect's eye had always noted it was slightly misaligned. Curiosity piqued. I pried it open. Inside was a leather folio. It didn't contain stock certificates or secret love letters. It contained mortgage documents. A second mortgage, to be precise, for $2.5 million, taken out against our fully paid-off Lincoln Park home. My signature was on every page, a flawless, undeniable forgery. The notary was a junior associate at his firm. I remembered staring at the papers, my vision blurring. He hadn't just been cheating on me. He had stolen our foundation, the one tangible asset that was supposed to be our shared future. The money had been wired to an account I couldn't access, an account tied to an LLC I had never heard of. When I confronted him, he had laughed it off. "It's a temporary liquidity solution, Sharon. A brilliant investment for the firm. The returns will be astronomical. You have to trust me. Trust me." The 2 words he had used to dismantle my life, piece by piece. Trust me when I said you should put your career on hold. Trust me when I said we should use your inheritance for the down payment on the house. Trust me when I said there was nothing going on with Rochelle. That was the moment love died. Not in a fiery explosion, but in the cold, silent vacuum of discovery. The planning for my exit began the next day. The affair was just noise. The forged signature was the declaration of war. "Sharon?" Daniel's voice was gentle, pulling me from the darkness of the memory. "You're thinking about it, aren't you? The house?" I nodded, unable to speak. "What he did was more than just criminal," he said, his gaze steady. "He looked at the home you built together, the future you were planning, and he leveraged it like any other asset on his balance sheet. You included. He was right. In James's world, everything and everyone had a price. He'd calculated my value and decided I was worth less than a high-risk investment. He had failed to account for one thing. I was no longer willing to be undervalued. I took the new phone from the table, its surface cool and unfamiliar. On the screen, Daniel had installed a private banking app. I logged in, and there it was. A balance that represented not just money, but freedom. A future. Enough to start over. Somewhere far away. Somewhere Anna Cole could build something new. Not just for herself, but for the tiny life growing inside her. "Thank you, Daniel," I said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. I couldn't have— I know, he interrupted softly. You would have done the same for me. Now get some sleep. The real work begins tomorrow. As I lay in the cabin's small guest room, listening to the wind sighing through the pines, I felt the first flutter in my womb. A tiny, reassuring pulse. It was a promise. I wasn't just running away from a man. I was running toward a future, and for the first time in a very long time, I would be its sole architect. I woke to the insistent buzz of the encrypted phone. The digital clock read 7:12 a.m. Sunlight streamed through the cabin window, painting stripes across the wooden floor. It was Daniel. His voice was grim, stripped of its usual calm. He's moving faster than we anticipated. He's already called the police. I sat up, my heart starting a frantic rhythm against my ribs. They'll make him wait 24 hours. An adult has the right to leave. Normally, yes, Daniel said. But James Scott isn't a normal person. He donated $500,000 to the police chief's re-election campaign last year. They're treating it as a priority, high-risk missing person case. He's playing the concerned husband card, and he's playing it hard. A chill snaked down my spine. I had underestimated his brazenness, his ability to manipulate the very systems meant to protect people. I moved to the living room, where the small television was tuned to a 24-hour news channel. And there he was. James stood on the steps of our brownstone, his face a mask of carefully crafted anguish. Rochelle was nowhere in sight. He wore a somber grey suit, his expression grave as he spoke to a scrum of reporters. "I'm begging for my wife's safe return," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Sharon has been under immense stress lately. She hasn't been herself. I fear she may be disoriented, confused. If anyone has seen her, please contact the authorities immediately. We just want her home safe. Stress. Disoriented. Confused." The words were poison darts, designed to discredit me before I could even speak. He was building his narrative. I wasn't a woman who had escaped a toxic marriage. I was an unstable wife who had suffered a mental breakdown. It was brilliant. It was diabolical. Standard playbook. Daniel's voice crackled over the phone. If he can't be the hero, he'll be the victim. It gets worse. He's offering a $50,000 reward. $50,000. That was enough to turn every gas station attendant, motel clerk, and nosy neighbor between Chicago and the coast into a potential informant. The safety of my anonymity was evaporating with every word he spoke. "They're triangulating your old phone's last location to the Fairmont," Daniel continued. "They'll be pulling surveillance footage from the entire area. My car will be on it. You need to get rid of it," I said instantly. Already on it. Meeting a contact in Milwaukee who specializes in making vehicles disappear. "But this accelerates everything, Sharon. You need to be transformed, and on the road by noon." I looked at my reflection in the dark television screen. The dark brown hair, the familiar shape of my face. It was the face of a missing person. It was a liability. In the bathroom, the supplies Daniel had packed were laid out like a surgeon's tools. Boxes of honey blonde hair dye, colored contacts, makeup palettes designed for contouring, for changing the very structure of one's face. The physical transformation from Sharon to Anna had to happen now, and it had to be perfect. As the acrid smell of the hair dye filled the small room, I thought about James's performance. He was a master manipulator, not just of finances, but of people. He had manipulated me for years, convincing me my own ambitions were small and frivolous compared to his grand vision. Now he was doing it to the entire city. My old life felt like a distant country. The woman who hosted elegant dinner parties and selected fabric swatches seemed like a stranger. That woman would have been terrified. She would have been broken by James's public betrayal. But Anna Cole wasn't broken. She was focused. As I washed the dark dye from my hair, watching it swirl down the drain like remnants of a past life, the encrypted phone buzzed again. It was a news alert from a local business journal that Daniel had forwarded. The headline read, "Scott Capital announces major European expansion. London office to open Q4. I froze, water dripping from my newly blonde hair onto the floor. The article detailed James's ambitious plan to launch a new headquarters in London. It quoted him extensively about his vision for global market dominance. The article was dated 2 days ago, the day before the gala. He had been planning a move. A massive, life-altering move to another continent. And he had never said a single word to me. My mind raced, connecting the dots. The second mortgage, the mysterious LLC, the drained accounts. It wasn't just a liquidity solution for his firm. He was funding his own escape, an escape that clearly didn't include me. Then Daniel sent a second link, this one from a high-end international real estate blog. The headline was a punch to the gut. Knightsbridge penthouse sells for $8.5 million to US financier. The article featured a photo. It was of James, beaming, standing on the balcony of a stunning glass-walled apartment with a panoramic view of Hyde Park. And standing next to him, her hand linked through his arm, was Rochelle Cherry. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. All this time, I had been meticulously planning my escape from him, believing I was one step ahead. But he had been planning his own exit all along. A new firm, a new continent, a new life with a new woman. I hadn't just been betrayed. I had been slated for abandonment. My disappearance hadn't ruined his plans. It had merely been an inconvenient, premature start to them. A strange, cold fury settled over me, displacing the fear. This changed everything. My plan was no longer about just disappearing and starting over. It was about survival against a man who would have left his pregnant wife with nothing but a mountain of debt and a forged signature. I looked at the emerging blonde woman in the mirror. Her eyes were still Sharon's, but they held a new, hard light. "Daniel," I said into the phone, my voice devoid of any tremor. "Change of plans. I'm not hiding in the Midwest. Book me a ticket. I'm going to London. If James Scott wanted to build a new empire, I would be there to watch it burn." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the phone. "London?" Daniel finally said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and dawning respect. "Sharon, that's the heart of his new operation. It's the last place you should be." "No," I countered, my voice hardening with newfound conviction. "It's the only place I can be. He'll be looking for a distraught, broken woman hiding in a small town in America. No one will be looking for a confident, successful architectural consultant setting up a new practice in the UK. They'll be looking for Sharon Russ. They won't even see Anna Cole." My mind was racing, the architect within me seeing the structural flaws in James's grand design. He was arrogant. He believed he had outsmarted everyone, especially me. His arrogance was the weakness I could exploit. Hiding was a defensive move. Going to London was an offensive one. "This is insane," Daniel breathed. "But it's also brilliant. It's a classic misdirection. But getting you there, a commercial flight, is impossible. Your face, even changed, is too much of a risk. The TSA, facial recognition. James will have put you on every watch list he can." "Then we find another way," I said, already toweling my blonde hair dry. The transformation was startling. The lighter hair color changed the entire tone of my skin, the shade of my eyes. I was already becoming someone else. "There's a network," Daniel said after a long pause. People I know through my work. Not criminals. Specialists. They help people disappear. Journalists in danger. Witnesses. People like you. It's deep. It's underground. And it's expensive. But they can get you to London without a paper trail. Use it, I said without hesitation. The money in the Zurich account was for this. It was for survival. While Daniel made the call, I finished my transformation. The hazel-colored contacts went in, turning my dark brown eyes into a warm, ambiguous shade. I used the contouring makeup, subtly altering the perceived shape of my cheekbones and jawline. I dressed in the simple, practical clothes from the go bag, jeans, a cashmere sweater, comfortable boots. Nothing like the designer labels Catherine Elliott favoured. When I looked in the mirror, the woman staring back was a stranger. Plausible. Unremarkable. Invisible. An hour later, Daniel called back. It's done. A woman will meet you in 2 hours. Her name is Marlene. She drives a beat-up Ford Transit van. Her company officially transports rare art pieces. You will be her cargo. She'll take you to a private airfield in rural Illinois. From there, a cargo plane to a staging point in Iceland, then another to a small airport outside of London. No passports, no commercial terminals. The efficiency was breathtaking. This was a world I never knew existed, operating in the shadows of the one James dominated. I have to go dark now, Sharon, Daniel said, his voice heavy. Once they identify my car from the Fairmont footage, they'll be all over me. They'll monitor my communications, my financials. I've prepared for it, but I can't risk leading them to you. From now on, you are Anna Cole. We can't speak directly again until this is over. The finality of his words hit me with unexpected force. Daniel was my lifeline. Now, the rope was being cut. How will I know you're okay? I asked, a knot of fear tightening in my chest. Every Friday I'll make a small anonymous donation to the World Wildlife Fund online. If you see the donation, you know I'm safe. If a week passes without it. He didn't need to finish. Be safe, Daniel. You too, Anna, he said, using the new name for the first time. The call ended. I stood in the silent cabin, completely and utterly alone. For a fleeting moment, the weight of it all threatened to crush me. I was a pregnant woman with a fake name, about to be smuggled across the Atlantic in a cargo plane, heading toward a confrontation with a powerful, ruthless man. I took a deep breath and placed a hand on my belly. The faint flutter I'd felt before was stronger now, a tiny flicker of life reminding me what this was all about. This wasn't just my fight. It was ours. I packed the few remaining items into a simple backpack. I wiped down every surface in the cabin, erasing any trace of my presence. As I waited for Marlene, I powered up the new laptop and began my research. I wasn't just going to London to hide. I was going there to build. I searched for small, independent architectural firms, co-working spaces for creative professionals, industry networking events. I started building the foundation for Anna Cole's professional life before she even set foot in the city. James had erased Sharon Russ's career. He would never get the chance to touch Anna Cole's. He thought he was building a global empire. He had no idea a ghost was coming, a ghost who knew all his secrets and had nothing left to lose. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and the game was moving to a new continent. The brown Ford Transit van that pulled up to the cabin looked exactly as Daniel had described, unassuming and slightly battered. The woman who stepped out was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and silver hair pulled back in a practical braid. She wore a simple denim jacket and carried herself with an air of quiet authority. "Anna?" she asked, her voice low and direct. There were no pleasantries. "Yes," I replied. "I'm Marlene. Let's go. We're on a tight schedule." The back of the van was surprisingly sophisticated. It was climate-controlled and fitted with secure harnesses and padded compartments. My backpack was stowed, and I was strapped into a small, concealed passenger seat. It was windowless and isolating, a moving vault designed to transport priceless objects. Today, that object was me. We drove for hours in silence. Marlene was a focused, methodical driver, her eyes constantly scanning the road and her mirrors. She was a professional, and her competence was a strange comfort in the disorienting darkness. "Daniel told me about your change of plans," she said eventually, her voice coming through a small intercom. "It's a bold move. Most people in your situation just run." "My husband left me with no other choice," I said. "Running isn't enough. Men like him, they don't just let go," Marlene observed. "They see people as possessions. When a possession is stolen, they'll burn down the world to get it back, not because they miss it, but because their pride can't handle the loss." Her words perfectly encapsulated James's mindset. His frantic search wasn't born of love or concern. It was a desperate attempt to regain control of a narrative that was slipping from his grasp. We arrived at a small private airfield in the middle of nowhere. The plane was a nondescript cargo jet. The pilot and co-pilot nodded at Marlene, but asked no questions. I was led aboard and secured in a small, pressurized compartment near the cockpit. It was rudimentary, but safe. As the plane took off, leaving the country I had once called home behind, the reality of my new life began to set in. I was no longer Sharon Russ. I was cargo. I was a secret. I was free. The journey was a blur of darkness, engine hum, and fitful sleep. When we finally landed, it was on another remote airstrip, this one surrounded by the stark, volcanic landscape of Iceland. A different team, equally professional and silent, transferred me to another plane. The second leg of the journey was shorter. When the cargo doors opened again, the air that greeted me was cool and damp. It smelled of rain and green earth. I was in England. Marlene was waiting for me. She drove us away from the airfield, this time in a modest sedan. We headed towards London, the urban sprawl gradually building around us. "We have a place for you," she said. "A corporate apartment in Islington, leased for 3 months under your new name. It's clean, secure, and private." The apartment was perfect. It was a modern, furnished one-bedroom in a quiet residential building. It was anonymous enough to be safe, yet located in a vibrant neighborhood where a single professional woman wouldn't stand out. "There's more," Marlene said, placing a slim leather portfolio on the small dining table. "Daniel laid the groundwork, but my network has built the structure. This is the complete identity package for Anna Cole." I opened it. The level of detail was staggering. Inside was a British driver's license, a national insurance card, and bank statements from a UK bank showing a modest but consistent financial history. There were degree certificates from the University of Manchester School of Architecture and a master's from a Swiss design institute whose records had conveniently been corrupted in a server fire a decade ago. The employment history was a work of art. It showed Anna Cole as a freelance consultant who had worked for several architectural firms that had since been acquired or gone bankrupt, making verification difficult, but not impossible. "Your digital footprint is already established," Marlene explained. "A LinkedIn profile, backdated professional correspondence, even a few social media accounts with high privacy settings. Enough to seem real to anyone who does a cursory search. But the most crucial part was the final document. It was a one-page summary of Anna Cole's professional specialty, consultant specializing in the integration of corporate cultures and physical workspaces during international mergers and acquisitions. I stared at it, the brilliance of the strategy clicking into place. James's new venture, Elliott and Associates, is planning to acquire several smaller British firms to establish their London presence, Marlene said, confirming my thoughts. They will need exactly the expertise that Anna Cole offers. You could be hired by one of those firms before the acquisition even happens. It gives you a legitimate reason to be inside their world. It was the ultimate Trojan horse. I wouldn't be an outsider trying to peer in. I would be an expert, invited inside the very walls of his new empire. There's one final step, Marlene said, her tone becoming more serious. The paperwork is one thing. Inhabiting the identity is another. You need to unlearn Sharon. Her posture, her vocal patterns, her deference. We have someone who can help. The next 3 days were a masterclass in psychological transformation. A woman named Dr. Alani Reed, a former behavioral analyst for MI6, worked with me. She was relentless. She corrected my posture. Sharon stands like she's apologizing for taking up space. Anna owns her ground. She retrained my speech. Sharon softens her opinions with qualifiers. Anna states her analysis with confidence. She even changed the way I made eye contact. It was exhausting. I was retraining muscle memory that had been reinforced for a decade. By the end of the 3rd day, I was mentally and physically drained. But I was also different. When I looked in the mirror, I saw Anna. Her gaze was direct. Her smile was genuine, not performative. Her confidence was earned, not borrowed. On the 4th day, Marlene brought me a tablet. "It's starting," she said. Daniel released the first package. The headline was from the Chicago Tribune. Scott Capital launches internal investigation into founder James Scott, following allegations of financial impropriety. The article, citing a confidential source, detailed the unauthorized second mortgage on the Lincoln Park property and raised questions about potential client fund mismanagement. James's carefully crafted image as the tragic victim was beginning to crack. The war had begun, and James had no idea his greatest adversary was already behind enemy lines, ready for the next move. Life in London settled into a quiet, purposeful rhythm. My flat in Islington became my sanctuary and my command centre. Mornings were for establishing Anna Cole's presence. I spent hours in cafes, a laptop open in front of me, drafting proposals and sending outreach emails to small and mid-sized architectural and design firms across the city. I wasn't just playing a role, I was actively building a legitimate business. My specialty, workspace integration during corporate mergers, was niche and in high demand in a city that was a global hub for finance and law. It was the perfect cover, leveraging my real expertise while providing a plausible reason for my interest in the very firms James was targeting for acquisition. Afternoons were for exploration. I walked for miles, learning the city's streets, from the leafy squares of Bloomsbury to the vibrant chaos of the South Bank. I sketched buildings in a small moleskin notebook, feeling a part of myself that had been dormant for a decade, slowly reawakening. In Chicago, I was Mrs. James Scott. Here, I was just Anna, a woman with a sketchbook and a future. The anonymity was intoxicating. I was careful. I paid for everything in cash or with the UK debit card. I varied my routines. I avoided the flashy, American-heavy districts like Mayfair and Knightsbridge, the places James and Rochelle would eventually frequent. I was a ghost, deliberately haunting the parts of the city they would never think to look. Every Friday, I checked the World Wildlife Fund's website, and every Friday, a new small donation would appear in the public ledger. Daniel is safe. The simple confirmation was a lifeline, a silent conversation across an ocean. 3 weeks after my arrival, the second wave of Daniel's attack hit. This time, the story was bigger. An investigative piece in the Wall Street Journal. The Missing Wife and the Missing Millions. Inside James Scott's Web of Deception. The article was a masterpiece. It methodically laid out the timeline of James's financial maneuvers, juxtaposing them against his public pleas for my return. It detailed the forged mortgage, the offshore LLC, and the Knightsbridge penthouse purchase. It didn't just suggest impropriety, it provided a roadmap of his fraud. Crucially, it included a quote from a handwriting expert who deemed the signature on the loan documents a highly skilled but definite forgery. The narrative collapsed overnight. James was no longer the grieving husband. He was the primary suspect in a story of greed and betrayal. The Chicago PD, facing public humiliation for being so easily manipulated, immediately reclassified my case, and the SEC officially launched a formal investigation into Scott Capital. I read the article from my small London flat, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. There was no triumph, no glee, only a cold, grim satisfaction. This was the inevitable consequence of his actions. I hadn't created his downfall. I had simply turned on the lights so the world could see the monster he had always been. My phone, the secure one Marlene had given me, buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The protocol was simple. If a message was legitimate, it would contain a specific 5-digit code. The code was there. The message was brief. He's distracted. The board is forcing him out. Rochelle is lawyering up. Now is the time to plant the seeds. It was time for Anna Cole to make her move. The next day, I attended a networking event for commercial design professionals in Shoreditch. I circulated, making conversation, discussing trends in sustainable office design. I was no longer the silent wife, standing by her husband's side. I was a professional, speaking with authority on a subject I loved. I targeted a conversation with the managing partner of a firm called Dalton and Finch, a respected historic British firm that I knew, from my research, was struggling financially and ripe for acquisition. I also knew it was at the top of James's target list. I introduced myself as Anna Cole. I spoke about my recent work in Switzerland, helping 2 merging banks integrate their workspaces without losing productivity. The partner, a man named Alistair Finch, was intrigued. That's precisely the challenge we may be facing, he admitted, his guard lowered after 2 glasses of wine. We're in talks about a potential partnership with a larger American entity. It's a delicate process, I said sympathetically. Merging corporate cultures is as much about architecture as it is about human resources. The physical space dictates how people interact, collaborate, and feel about the change. I gave him my card. Should you need an independent consultant to help navigate that transition, I'd be happy to have a conversation. He took the card, his expression thoughtful. Anna Cole, I'll keep this. It's very likely we'll be in touch. I walked home that night under the soft glow of London's streetlights. It was a gamble, a deliberate step into the path of the storm. But it felt right. James had built his empire on deception, on using people as pawns. I was using my intellect, my genuine skill, to build a new life. And if that life happened to give me a front-row seat to the implosion of his, it was a poetic justice I was willing to embrace. The calm was over. The storm was coming, and for the first time, I was ready to walk directly into it. The view from my office on the 22nd floor overlooked the sprawling, historic heart of London. A year ago, I had arrived as a ghost, a woman with a fake name and a secret. Today, Anna Cole was one of the most sought-after architectural consultants in the city. My firm, Cole Integration Strategies, had a waiting list of clients. I had built it from nothing, on merit and expertise alone. My hand rested on the swell of my belly. My son, due in 6 weeks, was a constant, comforting presence. He was my why, the reason for every risk I had taken. The alert on my screen was from the BBC. I clicked the link, my expression calm. American financier James Scott, sentenced to 7 to 10 years in federal prison for fraud and embezzlement. I scanned the article. James had pleaded guilty. The evidence against him, originating from the documents I had gathered, had been overwhelming. Scott Capital was bankrupt, its assets seized and liquidated. His former partners had turned on him, eager to save themselves. The empire he had been so proud of was nothing but a pile of legal ash. A separate, smaller article mentioned Rochelle Cherry. She had testified against James in exchange for immunity. Her career was in ruins. The last she was seen, she was boarding a flight back to her hometown in Ohio, her face shielded from paparazzi. The Knightsbridge penthouse had been seized as a proceed of crime. The life she had grasped for had vanished as quickly as it appeared. My secure phone, used only for communicating with the network, vibrated. It was a message from Daniel. Our first direct communication in a year. Justice of a sort. The Lincoln Park house sold at auction today. The last link is severed. You're free, Anna. Completely. I looked out at the London skyline. Was I free? I had been free the moment I walked out of that ballroom. This was just the epilogue. The story was no longer about James. It was about me. The irony was not lost on me that my biggest client was the consortium that had acquired the remnants of Dalton and Finch, the very firm James had been trying to buy. I had been hired to oversee the complete redesign and cultural integration of their new London headquarters. I was, quite literally, building a new future on the ruins of his failed ambitions. There was a soft knock on my office door. My assistant, a bright young woman named Chloe, popped her head in. "Alistair Finch is here to see you." "Send him in," I said. Alistair, the former partner of Dalton and Finch, now a senior executive in the new entity, entered. He was a kind, steady man who had become a friend and mentor over the past year. "Anna," he said, his face etched with a strange sympathy. "Did you see the news about that American fellow, James Scott?" I kept my expression neutral. I saw the headline, a cautionary tale. "Indeed," Alistair said, shaking his head. "The reason I bring it up is, well, it's a bit odd. When we were in our initial buyout talks with his people a year ago, they mentioned his wife, an architect. Her name was Sharon Russ." He looked at me, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "They said she had vanished. A terrible tragedy." I just thought, what a strange coincidence. Both architects, both, well, you know. My heart gave a single hard thud against my ribs. But my voice was even. "The world is full of coincidences, Alistair. Now, about the plans for the 4th floor atrium." We moved on, the moment passing. But it was a stark reminder of how close the two worlds, Sharon's and Anna's, still were. The ghost of the past was always there, just beneath the surface. Later that evening, as I walked home through the gentle London drizzle, I thought about his words. A tragedy. The world saw Sharon Russ's disappearance as a tragedy, the sad end to a story of a troubled woman. They didn't know it was a birth. I stopped in front of a small, independent bookstore, the warm light spilling onto the wet pavement. In the window was a book titled Invisible Women: How Society Erases Female Contribution. A year ago, I was one of them. My contributions to our life, our home, our finances, all erased by James to fuel his own narrative. He had tried to make me invisible. So I became invisible. And in that invisibility, I found my power, I found my voice, I found my strength. I continued home, my hand on my belly, feeling the gentle kick of my son. He would be born here, in London. He would have a British passport. He would grow up knowing only Anna Cole, a woman who built things, a woman who was strong and independent. He would never know the shadow of James Scott. The story wasn't about revenge. I realized that now. Revenge was a fire that consumed everything. This was about reclamation. I had reclaimed my name, my career, my future, and the right to bring my child into a world of safety and integrity. James wasn't a monster I had slain. He was simply a structural weakness in my old life, a flawed foundation that I had to demolish before I could build something true and lasting. And I was, first and foremost, an architect. Sharon's journey from a silent, betrayed wife to the powerful architect of her own destiny shows that sometimes the greatest act of defiance isn't a loud declaration, but a quiet, meticulously planned disappearance. She didn't just escape her husband, she outmaneuvered him, reclaimed her identity, and built a new future on her own terms, proving that true freedom isn't about running away, but about strategically rebuilding. Her story is a powerful reminder that the quietest people often have the most resilient spirits. If this story of resilience, strategy, and ultimate redemption moved you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who appreciates a story of strength. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a tale of justice and transformation. What part of Anna's plan impressed you the most? Let us know in the comments below. The silence in Leto was absolute. It was a suffocating, $100,000 silence, broken only by the sharp, stunned intake of a dozen breaths. Sebastian Montgomery, titan of tech, ruler of New York, was frozen. His smile, the one that charmed boards and disarmed rivals, had dissolved into a mask of pale, waxy horror. Across the room, framed by the restaurant's grand archway, stood his 7-month pregnant wife, Genevieve. She was a vision in blood red, her eyes not filled with tears, but with a terrifying Arctic calm. And she was walking right toward him. The silence in the Montgomery penthouse was a specific kind, a heavy, expensive silence that absorbed sound. It was the silence of thick Persian rugs laid over marble floors, of triple-paned glass that muted the roar of New York City into a distant, inconsequential hum. For Genevieve Ainsworth Montgomery, this silence had once felt like peace. Now at 8:07 p.m. on her 5th wedding anniversary, it felt like a tomb. At 32, Genevieve possessed a kind of beauty that seemed both timeless and fragile. Fine-boned, with hair the color of pale honey and eyes the shade of a stormy sea, she moved with the innate grace of old money. Her family, the Ainsworths, were Boston Brahmins, their wealth as established and understated as their ancestral homes. Marrying Sebastian Montgomery 5 years ago had been a merger, a union of her family's legacy with his bombastic, new money empire built on aggressive tech acquisitions. They were the city's golden couple. From the outside, their life was an exquisite tapestry. Inside, Genevieve had been pulling at loose threads for months. She stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, one hand resting protectively on the gentle, firm swell of her stomach. 7 months. After 2 years of quiet heartbreak, invasive treatments, and clinical despair, this baby was their miracle. It was supposed to be the glue that mended the imperceptible cracks that had formed in their marriage. Instead, the cracks seemed to be widening into chasms. Sebastian had become a ghost in their home. He was there physically, his 6'2" frame impeccably dressed, the scent of his oud cologne lingering. But his attention, his warmth, his spirit, those were absent. He lived through his phone, a small, secretive smile sometimes touching his lips. When she'd ask, the answer was always the same, clipped, dismissive litany. Work, Jen, always work. Tonight was their 5th anniversary. She had booked a private chef, the scent of seared scallops and truffle risotto, now a sickening mockery in the air. She'd arranged for her favorite peonies to fill the apartment and laid out the sapphire earrings he had given her on their 1st anniversary. It was a desperate, hopeful attempt to reclaim what they had lost. At 6:00 p.m., he'd breezed in, tossing his briefcase onto a velvet chaise. He didn't kiss her. He kissed the air near her cheek. Evening. Don't wait up for me. I've got that late dinner with the Japanese investors. We're trying to close the Kenjiro deal. Genevieve's heart, which had been fluttering with fragile anticipation, plummeted. Sebastian, it's tonight, our anniversary. He paused, halfway to the bedroom, and turned. For a moment, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt, perhaps. But it was extinguished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a mask of mild irritation. Right. Damn. Look, Jen, I'm sorry. This deal is massive. Billions on the line. We'll celebrate this weekend. I'll take you anywhere you want. Fly to Paris just for the weekend. How about that? He didn't wait for an answer. The promise of Paris was a practiced deflection, a shiny object meant to distract her from the immediate hurt. It used to work. It wasn't working anymore. The chef is already here, Sebastian, she said, following him, her slippers whispering on the carpet. I cancelled my spot at the Children's Foundation benefit for this. He emerged wearing a fresh shirt, his focus on his cufflinks. Well, uncancel it, or enjoy the meal yourself. Give the chef a big tip. We can afford it. His cruelty was casual, almost an afterthought. That's what hurt the most. He didn't even have the energy to argue properly. She was an item on his to-do list that he was rescheduling. Where is the dinner? She asked, her voice quiet but firm. Leto, he said, without thinking. They're very particular about punctuality. Leto. The word hung in the air. A physical blow. The city's most exclusive, most romantic restaurant, where a reservation was harder to get than a private audience with the Pope. It was where he had proposed to her. The irony was so thick, so suffocating, she felt she might choke on it. A business dinner. With Japanese investors, at the most intimate French restaurant in the city. The lie was not just a lie. It was an insult to her intelligence. She watched him spritz on his cologne, adjust his Patek Philippe watch. He looked every inch the billionaire titan of industry. He looked like a stranger. All right, Sebastian, she said, her voice betraying none of the turmoil inside her. She smoothed down the front of her silk maternity gown. Have a successful dinner. He gave her a brief, satisfied smile, pleased by her easy capitulation. That's my girl. I'll make it up to you, big time. He leaned in for another air kiss and was gone. The heavy front door closed with a soft, definitive click that echoed the closing of a door in her heart. The silence returned, heavier than before. The baby gave a soft kick, a gentle reminder of the life she was carrying. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling slightly. She didn't call her mother. She called the one person in Sebastian's orbit whose loyalty she had always trusted, a quiet, unassuming man who saw everything. Mr. Pembroke, she said, her voice low. I need a favor. I need to know about my husband's reservation at Leto tonight. There was a pause. Mr. Pembroke had been Sebastian's personal driver for a decade, a man of profound discretion. His silence was his answer. Please, Alistair, she whispered, using his first name for the first time in years. For me, another pause, then a sigh heavy with regret. "Mrs. Montgomery, the reservation is for 2, but the name of the second guest. It is not a Mr. Kenjiro. It's a Miss Cassandra Vance." The tomb had just cracked open. Sebastian Montgomery navigated his custom-built Aston Martin through the canyons of Manhattan with the same predatory grace he applied to the stock market. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a cocktail of power, guilt, and exhilarating freedom. Guilt was a fleeting, inconvenient emotion he'd learned to compartmentalize. Freedom, however, was the drug he chased, and Cassandra Vance was his newest, most potent dose. He glanced at the passenger seat. Cassie was everything Genevieve was not. Where Genevieve was classic elegance, Cassie was modern fire. Her hair was a sharp, jet-black bob, her lips were painted a defiant crimson, and her laughter was loud and uninhibited. She was 26, a hungry up-and-coming art curator he'd met at an Art Basel party he'd attended. Alone. "Are you sure about this, Seb?" Cassie asked, her voice a low purr. She ran a perfectly manicured finger along the polished walnut dashboard. "Your wife. An anniversary. It feels necessary," he interrupted smoothly. He reached over and took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "Jen and we've been drifting for a long time. The marriage has become a business arrangement." "And the baby?" she asked, her striking emerald eyes searching his. This was the delicate part. "The pregnancy," he sighed, a masterful performance of a man trapped. It was an accident, a last-ditch IVF effort that we didn't expect to work. It's complicated. It was a masterful blend of truth and fiction. They had been drifting. The IVF had been a long shot, but calling it an accident was a lie designed to absolve him, to paint him as a fellow victim of circumstance. "Tonight isn't for her," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's for us. It's time I stopped hiding you. It's time I started living my life for me. Leto, it's a symbolic place. It's where one chapter of my life began. And tonight, it's where it will end." Cassie's eyes widened. "End? You mean, you're going to tell her?" "I'm going to begin the process," he clarified, the careful wording of a CEO negotiating terms. "This dinner is the first step, a statement. People will see us. It will get back to her. It's better this way, cleaner than some tearful, messy confrontation at home." It was a breathtakingly cowardly and arrogant plan, born of a narcissism so profound he genuinely believed it was logical. By being seen with Cassie at Leto on this night, he would force the issue. He would create an irrefutable public fact that would make the inevitable separation Genevieve's reaction, not his action. He would be the man who had moved on. She would be the wife who couldn't handle it. He controlled the narrative. He always controlled the narrative. Genevieve, with her charities, her societal obligations, and now her pregnancy, represented a life of dignified predictability. A beautiful, high-stakes cage. Cassie represented a thrilling escape. He had conveniently forgotten that Genevieve's family, the Ainsworths, had been the key investors who legitimized his first major acquisition. He saw her legacy as a ladder he had finished climbing. He pulled up to the restaurant. "Don't be nervous," he said to Cassie, flashing his 1,000-watt smile. "You're with me. Tonight you're the only person in the room I see." She believed him. She had no reason not to. He had lied to her with the same flawless conviction with which he lied to his shareholders, his board of directors, and his wife. He believed his own performance. In his mind, he wasn't just a cheater. He was a romantic hero, bravely breaking free from a loveless prison to be with the woman he truly desired. The confirmation from Alistair Pembroke landed in Genevieve's soul like a shard of ice. A Miss Cassandra Vance. For a few long moments, she simply stood motionless in the center of her opulent living room, the phone still pressed to her ear. The scent of the anniversary dinner wafted from the kitchen, a nauseating mockery of her naivety. Betrayal was a physical thing. It started as a cold knot in her stomach, then spread through her veins, a chilling poison that made her limbs feel heavy, her head light. Her first instinct was to collapse, to retreat into the silken prison of her bed and let the tears come. It would have been the easy thing to do, the expected thing. It was the reaction of the Genevieve everyone knew, poised, gentle, accommodating. But as she stood there, another feeling began to stir beneath the pain. It was a slow, hot current of rage, an emotion so foreign and so potent it startled her. The rage burned away the shock, melted the ice, and in its place forged something hard and sharp. The baby kicked again, more forcefully this time, as if sensing its mother's shift in spirit. It wasn't a plea for protection. It felt like a call to arms. She was not just Genevieve Ainsworth Montgomery, society wife. She was an Ainsworth, a descendant of governors and shipping magnates, women who had weathered wars and financial collapses with iron wills hidden beneath silk gloves. She was the mother of a child who deserved better than a coward for a father and a fool for a mother. The tears that had threatened to fall evaporated. Her spine straightened. The fragile beauty was gone, replaced by a crystalline resolve. She was done being the victim in his story. Tonight, she would write her own chapter. "Thank you, Alistair," she said into the phone, her voice now steady and clear as a bell. "You've been a better friend to me than he has been a husband." She ended the call before he could reply. Her mind, once clouded with hurt, was now working with terrifying clarity. What was his goal? A public humiliation. He had chosen Leto, their place, knowing it would be full of their circle. He wanted to be seen. He wanted the news to crawl back to her, to break her from a distance. He was a coward, orchestrating a war by proxy. He would not have his proxy war. He would have a direct confrontation. She strode into her bedroom, bypassing the closet filled with elegant maternity dresses. She went instead to a section she hadn't touched in months, the clothes from her life before the pregnancy, before the final desperate hope that a baby would fix them. She pulled out a dress of deep crimson silk. It was a bold, striking piece designed to cling and command attention. It would be tight over her bump, an unapologetic declaration of her state. She was not a wilting flower. She was a woman carrying life, a life he had helped create and was now so casually discarding. As she did her makeup, her hands were rock steady. She lined her eyes, a sharp, dramatic cat eye. She chose a dark, vampiric shade of lipstick, the color of dried blood. She looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was not the one Sebastian had left an hour ago. This was a queen preparing for battle. The sapphire earrings he'd given her felt wrong, tainted. She replaced them with a pair of large diamond and onyx earrings, an Ainsworth family heirloom. They felt like armor. She walked back into the living room. The private chef, a kindly man named Pierre, looked up from the stove with a worried expression. "Madame Montgomery, is everything all right?" "Monsieur is late. There's been a change of plans, Pierre," Genevieve said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Dinner is cancelled. Please pack everything up. Send the bill for your full service to my husband's office, and add a significant inconvenience fee." Pierre's eyes widened, but he simply nodded. "Oui, madame." Genevieve slipped on a pair of sharp stiletto heels. Impractical. Painful. Perfect. She grabbed a small clutch, her phone, and paused by the table set for two. With a deliberate, steady hand, she picked up the single perfect peony from the vase and snapped its stem. The quiet crack was deeply satisfying. She didn't call a car service. She walked out to the street and hailed a yellow cab, the kind of transport Sebastian would have sneered at. The city lights blurred past, a river of gold and neon. During the ride, she didn't rage or cry. She planned. She thought about prenuptial agreements, about company bylaws, about the shares in Montgomery Tech that were held in her name as part of the marriage merger. She thought about the Ainsworth legal team, a pack of sharks who had been with her family for generations. Sebastian thought this was a personal drama. He had forgotten it was also a business transaction, and he was about to make a very, very bad trade. When they arrived at Leto, the maître d', a severe-looking man named Antoine, greeted Sebastian with the practiced deference reserved for the city's true royalty. "Monsieur Montgomery, a pleasure. Your table is ready." Antoine's eyes flickered to Cassie for a microsecond, a flicker of professional surprise that he quickly masked. He knew Mrs. Montgomery well. Sebastian ignored it, high on his own audacity. He guided Cassie through the hushed, candlelit dining room, a space so intimate that every table felt like a private island. The air was thick with the scent of truffles and old money. Heads turned, whispers followed in their wake, like the ripples from a stone tossed into a still pond. He recognized at least a half-dozen people. A rival hedge fund manager, a Broadway producer, and, perfect, Catherine Reed, the editor of the city's most powerful gossip column. He had reserved the best table in the house, a secluded corner booth with a panoramic view of the park, the very table where he had asked Genevieve to be his wife. The cruelty of the choice was a demonstration of his power, a signal that he could overwrite their shared history with a new one. "It's beautiful," Cassie breathed, her initial nervousness melting away under the force of his confidence. "Only the best," he said, ordering a bottle of Cristal champagne. He conveniently forgot that Genevieve's obstetrician had advised him not to drink in solidarity with her. As the champagne was poured, his phone buzzed, a text from his COO about the Conjiro deal. He fired off a quick reply, feeling the familiar thrill of command. He could juggle it all: his empire, his wife, his mistress. He was Sebastian Montgomery, and the world bent to his will. "So," Cassie said, leaning forward, her eyes sparkling, "tell me about this new chapter. What does it look like?" Sebastian smiled, a slow, predatory smile. "It looks like you. It looks like my jet, but not for a weekend in Paris, for a month in the Maldives. It looks like you on the cover of Art World magazine, with the Montgomery Foundation backing your new gallery. It looks like whatever we want it to be." He was selling her a future, and she was buying it. He raised his glass. "To new beginnings, to new beginnings," she echoed, her glass clinking against his. Across the room, Catherine Reed discreetly snapped a photo with her phone. The ripples were already turning into waves. Sebastian saw it, and he felt a savage sense of satisfaction. The fuse was lit. He had no idea he was sitting at ground zero. The cab pulled up to Leto. Genevieve didn't hesitate. She paid the driver, stepped onto the curb, and took a deep, steadying breath. The doorman, accustomed to her arriving on the arm of Sebastian, rushed to open the door, his face a mask of confusion. "Mrs. Montgomery, what a surprise." "I'm sure it is," she said, her voice like Arctic air. She swept past him, her crimson dress a slash of color in the restaurant's muted, golden ambiance. Every head in the room turned. The whispers that had followed Sebastian and Cassie now fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The air crackled with tension. Catherine Reed's eyes were wide with predatory glee. This was a story beyond her wildest dreams. Genevieve's gaze swept the room, calm and imperious, until it landed on the corner booth. Their booth. She saw him laughing, leaning intimately towards a woman she had never seen before, a woman who was young, beautiful, and sitting in her seat. She saw the bottle of Cristal. She saw his hand resting on the other woman's, and in that moment Sebastian looked up. His eyes met hers across the room. His smile froze, then fell from his face. The color drained from his cheeks. The look on his face was one of pure, unadulterated shock, the panic of a master strategist whose perfect plan had just been detonated in his face. Genevieve began to walk towards him. Each step was deliberate, measured. The click of her heels on the polished floor was the only sound in the dead silent room. It was the sound of a clock ticking down to 0. The storm hadn't just gathered. It had arrived. The walk across the dining room of Leto felt like a mile. With every step, Genevieve could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and shock. She ignored it all. Her entire universe had narrowed to the corner booth and the two people sitting in it. Cassie Vance felt the shift in atmosphere first, the sudden silence, the collective intake of breath. She saw Sebastian's face change, the confident, seductive charm dissolving into a mask of pale horror. She turned her head, following his gaze, and saw her, a stunning, incredibly pregnant woman in a blood-red dress with eyes that looked like chips of ice. It took Cassie a moment to connect the dots. The wife, the pregnant wife, the one he'd said was part of a business arrangement. "Seb," Cassie whispered, her voice laced with confusion. "Who is that?" Sebastian didn't answer. He was paralyzed, caught in the headlights of a disaster entirely of his own making. He had planned for whispers, for rumors, for a controlled demolition. He had not planned for this, for Genevieve, in the flesh, looking like an avenging angel here to preside over his public execution. Genevieve reached the table. She didn't look at Cassie. Not yet. Her gaze was locked on her husband. She stood there for a long moment, allowing the tableau to sear itself into the memory of everyone watching. The billionaire, his mistress, and his 7 months pregnant wife. "Sebastian," she said. Her voice wasn't a shout. It was worse. It was calm, controlled, and dripping with contempt. "I believe you have my seat." The simple sentence landed with the force of a physical blow. Sebastian flinched. He started to stand, knocking his knee against the table in his haste. "Genevieve, what are you doing here? We can talk about this at home." "Home?" Genevieve let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. "You mean that place you occasionally visit between business trips?" "No, I don't think so. You wanted a public statement, Sebastian. So here I am. Let's make a statement." Her eyes finally moved to Cassie. She took in the younger woman's sharp beauty, her expensive dress, her confused and dawning horror. Genevieve saw not an enemy, but another casualty of Sebastian's colossal ego. "And you must be the Japanese investor," Genevieve said, her voice softening with a chilling sort of pity. "He has a real talent for mergers and acquisitions, doesn't he? Tell me, did he promise you the world? A new gallery? Perhaps a life free of complications?" Cassie stared, speechless. Genevieve had just articulated the exact promises Sebastian had made not 10 minutes earlier. The realization that she was not a partner in his new life, but simply a pawn in the destruction of his old one, hit her with sickening force. She looked at Sebastian, her expression shifting from adoration to disbelief and then to fury. "What is she talking about, Seb?" Cassie demanded, her voice rising. "Jen, stop it! You're making a scene!" Sebastian hissed, his face now a blotchy red. He reached for her arm. Genevieve pulled back as if his touch were venomous. "A scene?" she repeated, her voice rising in volume, finally cracking with the raw pain she had held in check. "You dare to talk to me about making a scene. You bring your acquisition to our restaurant, to our table, on our anniversary, while I am at home pregnant with your child, and you talk to me about making a scene?" The word pregnant echoed in the silent room. Cassie recoiled as if she'd been slapped. This was it. The precipice. The point of no return. Genevieve looked at the table between them. The champagne, the half-eaten appetizers, the symbol of his betrayal. All the hurt, the lies, the months of quiet anguish, the calculated cruelty of this evening. It all coalesced into a single, white-hot point of rage. She had come here to confront him. But as she stood there, a new, primal impulse took over. It wasn't enough to talk. It wasn't enough to expose him. He wanted a statement. She would give him one. With a sudden guttural cry that was torn from the depths of her soul, Genevieve leaned forward, gripped the edge of the heavy oak table, and shoved. The sound was explosive. A crash of shattering crystal, the clatter of silverware, the sickening, wet thud of food hitting the floor and the people around it. The bottle of crystal cartwheeled through the air, spraying champagne over a horrified banker at the next table. A plate of oysters slid directly into Sebastian's lap. The entire carefully constructed scene of illicit romance was instantly obliterated, replaced by a chaotic, sticky, humiliating mess. Gasps rippled through the restaurant. Several people instinctively pulled out their phones, the red lights of recording videos blinking in the dim light. Sebastian was on his feet now, dripping with champagne and seafood, his face a mask of utter fury and disbelief. "Are you insane?" he roared, but Genevieve was already turning away. She hadn't overturned the table in a moment of uncontrolled hysteria. It was a calculated act of symbolic destruction. She was tearing down their life, right here, right now, on her own terms. She took one last look at the wreckage, at her humiliated husband and his stunned mistress sitting amidst the debris of their sordid little dinner. She felt nothing but a cold, clean emptiness. She turned her back on him, on them, on the entire life they had built. As she walked towards the exit, her head held high, her crimson dress a beacon in the chaos, she delivered her final line, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Have a successful dinner, Sebastian. It looks like the deal is off." Then she was gone. The immediate aftermath was a study in chaos. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then the spell broke. Antoine rushed forward with two waiters, his face a grim mask of damage control. Sebastian stood dripping, an oyster clinging precariously to his lapel. The whispers started again, this time with unconcealed scorn. The flash of Catherine Reed's phone cut through the dim light. "Get out!" Sebastian snarled at Cassie, his voice low and venomous. His grand gesture had backfired spectacularly, and like all narcissists in the face of failure, he needed a target. Cassie, spattered with food and shock, stared at him. The man who had promised her the world was now looking at her with pure hatred. The illusion shattered. "Me?" she shot back, her voice shaking with fury. "You lied to me. You used me. You told me she was just a business arrangement. I told you to be discreet. I didn't tell you to sit there and let my wife ambush us." He lied, desperately trying to rewrite history. "Your wife didn't ambush us, Sebastian," Cassie retorted, her intelligence returning with a vengeance. "She ambushed you. You're a coward and a liar." She grabbed her purse and pushed her way through the gawking diners, leaving him utterly alone in his self-made disaster. Sebastian saw Alistair Finch, his primary competitor in the tech space, watching from a nearby table. Finch raised his glass in a mock toast. The shame was a physical burn. Sebastian threw a black Amex card on a clean table. "Cover everything," he barked at Antoine, and if a single photo from this room leaks, I'll buy this restaurant just to fire you." It was an empty threat. The story was already out. As Sebastian strode towards the exit, he was met by a fresh hell. The paparazzi. A wall of flashing lights erupted. "Sebastian, is it true you were dining with a mistress?" "Mr. Montgomery, what's the status of your marriage?" He shoved his way through, his face a thunderous mask, and threw himself into his Aston Martin. He sped away, his phone exploding with calls from his PR chief, his lawyer, his mother. He had been humiliated. But more than that, he had been outmaneuvered. Genevieve's actions weren't hysterical. They were strategic. She had launched a hostile takeover of the narrative. He finally drove home, back to the silent penthouse. He expected to find it in disarray. Instead, it was pristine. The kitchen was spotless. The table for two was gone. The broken peony was gone. It was as if she and their anniversary had been erased. The only thing out of place was a single sheet of paper on the hall table. It wasn't a letter. It was a document from the law firm of Ainsworth, Finch and Barrett. It was a formal notice. Effective immediately, Genevieve Ainsworth Montgomery was filing for an injunction to freeze all jointly held assets pending a formal review of their prenuptial agreement, citing gross marital misconduct. Furthermore, as a significant shareholder in Montgomery Tech, she was calling for an emergency meeting of the board to discuss the potential reputational and financial risk posed by the CEO's recent conduct. Sebastian's blood ran cold. This wasn't a divorce. This was a declaration of war. She wasn't coming for his heart. She was coming for his company. While Sebastian was reeling from his public disgrace, Genevieve was not at home crying. She was in a discreet, wood-paneled office in Midtown, a fortress of old-world law and new-world aggression. This was the headquarters of Ainsworth, Finch and Barrett. With her sat two men. The first was Carter Barrett, a 60-year-old lawyer with eyes like a hawk and a reputation for surgically dismantling his opponents. The second was her older brother, Donovan Ainsworth. Donovan was the antithesis of Sebastian. Where Sebastian was slick polish, Donovan was raw power. A former Marine turned venture capitalist, he had the same stormy eyes as his sister. But his were set in a rugged, imposing face. He had distrusted Sebastian from day one. "You did well tonight, Jen," Donovan said, his voice a low rumble. He handed her a glass of water. "You took control. Now we press the advantage." Carter Barrett slid a thick binder across the mahogany table. "The injunction is filed. By 7 a.m. tomorrow, he won't be able to move $1 from any joint account without our approval. The call for the board meeting has been sent to all members. Catherine Reed's column just posted. The stock is going to hemorrhage in pre-market trading. As the face of the company, his public implosion gives us significant leverage." Genevieve nodded, her focus absolute. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a cold, clear, strategic mind. The prenup. He was so proud of it. He called it an ironclad fortress. "Every fortress has a back door," Carter said with a thin smile. Sebastian designed it to protect his premarital assets, which is standard. However, Clause 11B, the infidelity clause, is our way in. He assumed it would be used to negotiate a higher settlement for you. He never imagined it could be used to question his fitness as CEO of a company in which you hold a significant, contractually tied stake. Donovan leaned forward. "Your shares, Jenny, your 10%. When you married him, Dad insisted your stake wasn't just a gift. It was a check and balance. Sebastian's reputation is now a liability to the company's stock price. The board has a fiduciary duty to act. We're not just arguing about a marriage, we're arguing about shareholder value." This was the Ainsworth gambit. They were transforming a messy, personal divorce into a cold, corporate coup. Sebastian had underestimated her, and more foolishly, he had underestimated her family. As the strategic talk swirled around her, Donovan paused, his expression softening as he looked at his sister, the rage in his eyes replaced by a deep, protective concern. "Jen, are you all right?" "Really?" he asked. "Forget the money. Forget the company. What he did to you. To the baby." Genevieve's composure finally wavered. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "He killed what was left of us, Donnie. He killed it on purpose. He was always a snake," Donovan growled. "I never understood what you saw in him, especially after he said what he did about the treatments." Genevieve froze. What are you talking about?" Donovan hesitated, looking at Carter, then back at his sister. "Damn it. A few months ago, at the club, he'd had a few too many scotches. I was congratulating him, cautiously, on you being pregnant. And he just laughed. It was a bitter sound. He said something like, 'A miracle. That's what she calls it. Or maybe just good timing from the mailman.' He implied the baby wasn't his." The air left Genevieve's lungs. It was a betrayal so profound, so much deeper than simple adultery, that it threatened to undo the iron resolve she had so carefully constructed. Sebastian didn't just cheat on her. He suspected her of cheating on him, and he had used that suspicion to justify his own affair. He had poisoned their one miracle before it had even begun. "But why?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He knows his issues. 2 years prior, after a severe illness, a doctor had given Sebastian a grim prognosis about his fertility. The chances were astronomically low. It had crushed him, striking at the core of his virile, powerful self-image. The subsequent rounds of IVF had been her idea, her hope. He had participated reluctantly, already resigned to failure. And here was the final, devastating twist. The secret she had been holding on to. The one she had planned to reveal tonight as the ultimate anniversary surprise. She looked at her brother, her eyes filled with a fresh, tragic pain. "He's wrong, Donnie," she said, her voice barely audible. "He's so wrong." She reached into her crimson clutch and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She had been carrying it with her all night, a talisman of hope that was now a relic of a dead dream. She slid it across the table to her brother. It was a lab report from her obstetrician, dated 3 weeks ago. It was the result of a non-invasive prenatal paternity test. She had done it secretly, wanting to have irrefutable proof to present to him alongside her announcement. A grand gesture to erase all his silent, masculine fears. Donovan unfolded it. He scanned the technical jargon until he found the conclusion at the bottom. Probability of paternity. 99.999% subject. Sebastian Montgomery. "No," Genevieve whispered, another tear falling. "The last round of IVF. It worked. I wanted to surprise him tonight. I wanted to see his face when he knew for sure that he hadn't failed, that we had our miracle, his miracle." The tragic irony was suffocating. The entire edifice of his betrayal, the affair with Cassie, the lies, the public humiliation, had been built on a foundation of his own bitter, mistaken insecurity. He had thrown away the one thing he secretly wanted most in the world at the very moment it had been given to him. He hadn't just cheated on his wife. He had betrayed his own unborn child in the most fundamental way possible. Carter Barrett, the lawyer who had watched this exchange in silence, cleared his throat gently. He looked at the paternity test, then at Genevieve, his hawk-like eyes filled not with legal cunning, but with a flicker of human sympathy. "This," he said, his voice low and firm, "changes everything. This isn't just a divorce leverage point, Mrs. Montgomery. This is the moral justification for a complete corporate and personal restructuring. He didn't just break a contract. He abdicated his entire legacy based on a lie he told himself. Genevieve slowly refolded the paper. The ice was back, harder than before. "Good," she said. "Use it. Use it all. I want him to understand what he's lost." 3 months later, the New York autumn had turned the leaves in Central Park to shades of gold and rust. The city was the same, but the world of Sebastian and Genevieve Montgomery had been irrevocably altered. The fallout from the Leto incident had been swift and brutal. Catherine Reed's column, complete with grainy cell phone videos of the table flip, had gone viral. Montgomery tech stock plummeted by 15% overnight. The emergency board meeting was a bloodbath. Faced with the infidelity clause, the PR nightmare, and the quiet, iron-willed pressure from the Ainsworth contingent, Sebastian was given an ultimatum. Step down as CEO and take a leave of absence, or be forced out in the most public, humiliating way imaginable. He chose to step down. His empire, the monument to his ego, was now being run by a caretaker board heavily influenced by Donovan Ainsworth. For Sebastian, the ensuing weeks were a descent into a private hell. The paternity test results had been delivered to him by Carter Barrett. The news that the child, his miracle son, as a later ultrasound had revealed, was unequivocally his, did not bring him joy. It brought him to his knees. It retroactively turned his actions from those of a wronged man lashing out into those of a fool of Shakespearean proportions. He had possessed everything he ever wanted, and, in a fit of arrogant pique, set it all on fire. He was a pariah. Friends stopped returning his calls. He was left alone in the silent penthouse, a king deposed in his own empty castle. Genevieve, on the other hand, had flourished. She had moved out of the penthouse and into a magnificent brownstone on the Upper East Side, an Ainsworth property. She had shed the Montgomery from her name, reclaiming her identity as Genevieve Ainsworth. Her pregnancy was the talk of the city, but for a new reason. She was no longer the pitied wife. She was a symbol of strength. She graced the cover of Forbes magazine, not as a socialite, but as a savvy businesswoman who had protected her family's investment and her own dignity. The article was titled, "The Ainsworth Ascent: How Genevieve Ainsworth Turned Betrayal into a Boardroom Victory." The day her son was born was a crisp October morning. She named him Arthur Maxwell Ainsworth. She gave him her name, not his father's. A week later, Sebastian made his final, desperate move. He appeared at her brownstone unannounced, looking like a shadow of his former self. His expensive suit hung on him, and his eyes were hollow. The door was opened by Donovan. "She doesn't want to see you, Sebastian." "Please," Sebastian begged, his voice raspy. "Donovan, please, I just want to see him. I need to see my son." From inside, Genevieve's voice came, calm and steady. "Let him in, Donnie." Donovan stepped aside, his expression thunderous. Sebastian walked into the sun-drenched living room. It was warm and alive, filled with flowers and the soft sounds of a newborn. It was everything his penthouse was not. Genevieve was sitting in an armchair, holding the baby. Arthur was tiny, wrapped in a soft blue blanket. Sebastian stopped a few feet away, his throat tight. He looked from the baby to Genevieve. There are no words. Sorry is a pathetic insult. I was a fool. I was broken, and I broke everything around me." Genevieve listened, her expression unreadable. "You were," she agreed, her voice devoid of heat. "But your brokenness is not my burden to carry, not anymore. Let me fix it," he pleaded, taking a hesitant step forward. "I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll give you anything you want. We can try again. For him." He gestured to the baby. Genevieve's gaze sharpened. "For him? You will not use our son as a bargaining chip to repair your pathetic ego, Sebastian. Let me be perfectly clear. We are never, ever trying again. You destroyed that. You burned that bridge and you salted the earth behind it. His face fell. The last flicker of hope died. However, she continued, her voice softening slightly as she looked down at the sleeping infant, he is your son. He is innocent in all this, and he deserves to know his father, provided his father can prove himself to be a man worthy of knowing. She stood up, walking over to him. She held the baby out. You may hold your son. With trembling hands, Sebastian took the small bundle. He looked down at the tiny, perfect face, and for the first time in his adult life, he began to weep. Not tears of self-pity, but tears of profound, gut-wrenching loss for the family he could have had, for the man he should have been. He will have the Ainsworth name, Genevieve said, her voice firm, the new matriarch setting the terms of surrender. You will be allowed supervised visits, which will increase if, and only if, you demonstrate genuine, consistent change. You will contribute to a trust in his name, which I will manage. You are not my husband anymore, Sebastian. You are simply Arthur's father, and that is a privilege you will have to earn every single day for the rest of your life. She watched him, her heart no longer filled with love or hate, but with a cool, clear-eyed resolve. She had survived. She had won. And as she looked at her son, now stirring in his father's arms, she knew her new life, the one she had forged from the ashes of betrayal, was just beginning. In the end, the Montgomery Empire wasn't brought down by a market crash, but by a single act of public defiance. Genevieve Ainsworth turned her deepest humiliation into her greatest weapon, reclaiming not just her dignity, but control of her future. She proved that true power isn't measured in stock prices, but in the courage to tear down a toxic world and build a new one on your own terms. Sebastian lost everything because he saw his pregnant wife as a liability, never realizing she was his most valuable and dangerous asset. If you were captivated by this story of strength and justice, be sure to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more unforgettable dramas. Don't forget to ring the bell so you're always the first to know.